Good evening, everyone. I am very concerned about the situation in Durban and South Africa regarding the xenophobia. I have direct experience of this. I tried to visit a friend who was in Addington Hospital, and outside Addington, I was stopped by some people who wanted me to show them my ID. And I said to them, "What is this? Who are you?" And they said, "We're from March and March." So I said to them, "No, I don't have to show you my ID. You're not officials." And yeah, I tried to reason with them, and they went on about Nigerians bringing drugs. And I said, "But we have South Africans who are criminals as well." So I just want to read to you from ICJ, the International Commission of Jurists, saying that South Africa must act urgently against xenophobia and violence to prevent further harm. Sorry, it's International Commission of Jurists calls on President Cyril Ramaphosa, the South African police, and relevant government agencies to protect non-citizens, dismantle vigilante networks, and uphold South Africa's constitutional and international human rights law obligations. I also have heard from people that there are messages going around on social media calling on groups to go into Umlazi and go door to door on the 30th of June looking for foreigners. We already have had people chased out of their homes. People came with machetes and they attacked a man, and he's in hospital. His wife wasn't hurt. And this is the kind of incident we could expect unless South Africa acts urgently. The International Commission of Jurists is deeply concerned by the escalating anti-migrant mobilization in South Africa, which has been marked by xenophobic rhetoric, threats, and attacks targeting non-citizens. Vigilante groups such as Operation Dudula and March have engaged in campaigns publicly calling for all undocumented non-citizens, and in some cases even foreign nationals whose presence in the country is compliant with domestic legislation, to leave the country by 30th of June. Reported harassment incidents, attempts by private persons to verify people's identity documents at their workplaces and public health clinics, and efforts to exclude non-citizens from basic services have accompanied these vigilante groups, campaigning, contributing to a climate of fear and exclusion. These developments give rise to serious concern about the protection of human rights guaranteed under South Africa's constitution, including the rights to dignity, equality, and security of the person, as well as pursuant to the country's binding obligations under international human rights law to prevent discrimination, protect all persons from violence, and ensure equal protection of the law without distinction. While the ICJ welcomes President Cyril Ramaphosa's affirmation that immigrant enforcement is the responsibility of the state and not of private actors, the human rights organization calls on state actors, including the Department of Home Affairs and the police, to take active steps to ensure that immigration enforcement is not carried out by private individuals. No private individual or organization has the authority to enforce immigration laws or determine who belongs in South Africa. The continued operation of groups that openly target, intimidate, and seek to exclude non-citizens raise a serious concern about the failure of state authorities to take effective measures to prevent xenophobic violence, protect communities at risk, and hold those responsible for hate-based intimidation and unlawful conduct accountable. The courts in South Africa have repeatedly been called upon to address the consequences of xenophobic vigilantes. On the 4th of November 2025 in Kopanang, Africa, against Xenophobia and others versus Operation Dudula and others, in which the ICJ intervened, the High Court of South Africa handed down judgment finding Operation Dudula and its leadership guilty of engaging in intimidation, harassment, and incitement of hate speech and violence on the grounds of nationality, social origin, and ethnicity. The High Court further prohibited the group from demanding identity documents from members of the public or otherwise taking the law into their own hands. So there was this judgment, and yet it hasn't been enforced. So I had direct experience of this, and we know this continues. In separate but related legal proceedings brought by the Treatment Action Campaign, Medicines Sans Frontiers, Kopanang, Africa Against Xenophobia, and others, concerning vigilante groups' obstruction of access to healthcare facilities, the courts have similarly been called upon to address the denial of essential services to migrants and other persons at risk. These recent developments involving the actions of vigilante groups must also be understood against the backdrop the government's recent response to rising anti-migrant mobilization, including recent statements by President Cyril Ramaphosa on 8th of June. Worryingly, he noted that the Department of Home Affairs, Border Management Authorities, South African Police Service, and other law enforcement agencies have been and will intensify the process of identifying and deporting undocumented foreign nationals residing illegally in South Africa. While the President also stated that South Africans are not xenophobic, framing migration primarily through enforcement and deportation risks lending legitimacy to vigilante groups and their xenophobic rhetoric and actions, and further undermining the state's binding legal obligations to protect all persons regardless of nationality or immigration status. It is highly regrettable and deeply concerning because with his statement, the President may be viewed as acceding to and supporting the demands of vigilante groups. South Africa's constitution explicitly guarantees and requires the protection of the rights to dignity, equality, and security of all people within the country's borders, regardless of nationality or immigration status. At the international level, as a state party to the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, etc., South Africa is also legally obliged to prevent discrimination, combat hate speech and violence, and protect all persons within its jurisdiction from xenophobic attacks. And so it continues. Please, I would encourage you to read it yourself. Thank you, and let us help one another and encourage our government to take action against these vigilante groups. And good night. Where do I stop it? Okay, there we go.